Come on down.
You want to pan and get a crowd shot just so that they're all
already did.
stunned?
Well, I don't really know what to say in terms of an introduction other than this is a good friend of ours, that Ann Parrfett. We met probably close to 5 years ago. Not quite, but close to. It was fall of '92 at the seminary. I was on one track and she was on another, but we crossed paths quite a bit, and it was during probably our third year, during my internship, that we got better acquainted, because I said she has many gifts, and one of those is a gracious spirit of hospitality, especially when it comes to babysitting or dog sitting, and we were able to take a vacation because of her willingness to help us out.
Well, Dixie's a Cocker Spaniel, so.
And she loves Cocker Spaniels, and has one, a pretty young one, out in the car as we speak. So.
I just ran out, he's fine. For any of you who worry about people who do what I'm doing, he's fine. I was worried.
But anyhow, as I mentioned, just snips and pieces that we had talked about in our conversations, I felt just sounded like some good stuff could be shared here this morning. And I don't exactly know the form in which it's going to take, so I will find out too, along with you, and we'll just turn it over to Ann to just do her thing, okay?
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ann Parrfett, and I am an ethicist. That means I practice ethics for a living. Blair and I met, and Ellen and Blair and I met at seminary when Blair was studying to become a pastor. He was on the divinity track, and I was on a track called theological studies because my area of concentration is ethics. Ethics is an area that people tend to get a little uncomfortable with. It gets confused with morals, and it gets confused with manners. And whenever anybody says that they are a professional ethicist, everybody else wants to kind of move away because it seems like I'm the one who has the rule books, and if you don't do it right, you know what's going to happen. I'm going to know, right? It's not that way at all. And it has very little to do with manners other than that we want to make the people around us feel comfortable. And so there are some tie-ins there. But what I do for a living is to work with companies, and I could also work with individuals and hospitals, to help people make some very difficult decisions. Sometimes I'll work with an organization that has problems that were really big, well, there's still problems today, but were new big problems in the 1970s and 80s, things like sexual harassment, and things like conflict of interest in the workplace, things like racial discrimination and diversity in corporations. In hospitals, I might be talking to a family about biomedical ethics, life and death decisions. Do we pull the plug? Do we intervene on behalf of this baby who probably isn't going to live more than a short period of time? What do we do? And that's what ethics is about. I came to this track by way of LA Law. LA Law sent me to seminary. Wouldn't have thought that. It wasn't my favorite show. I never watched it. But my late husband did. And one night I just needed to do something that made me feel like this is what he used to do. I kind of want him in the house. I don't know how else to get him in the house. So I'll turn on television and watch his favorite show. And I'm going to tell you about this particular case that LA Law had to deal with. And then I'm going to ask you to vote either for the plaintiff or for the defendant. And if you remind me before I leave today, I'll tell you what LA Law came up with. Okay, here's the case. LA Law, you are the jury. In this case, there is a man who's setting up a foundation. He wants to give away $250,000 to some worthy cause. The foundation is to honor his parents who were killed in the Holocaust. The Holocaust is the time during World War II when the Nazis killed people who were Jewish. They didn't like them. His parents were among the people who were killed. He wanted to honor their memory, so he sent out RFPs, which is a formal name for, or formal letters, which means request for proposal. And he got a lot of requests coming in, and one came from a doctor who was undergoing research to cure a particular disease. And she said if she had this $250,000, she would be able to speed up her research by a full year. She felt that she was 2 years away from that cure. So if she had the $250,000, she would be 1 year away from the cure. 40,000 people a year were dying from this disease, so that year would save 40,000 lives. And the man thought to himself, and he said, this is very good. This will honor my parents. You get the money. And if you can imagine, when you give away $250,000, you kind of like to know what's going on. So she proceeded to do the research that she was doing, and he said, oh, can I read your reports? Can I know what you're doing? And she was very generous, and she shared reports and shared information about what she was doing. And he was reading through the data, and he saw that some of the information that she was relying on came from those horrible experiments that were being done, conducted on Jewish people during the war, those military death camps that experimented on people. And he went to her and he said, I'm sorry, you can't use this information. This you can't put into your study. And she said, I can't unknow what I know. This is already something that exists out there, so I need to use this data. And he said, well, I'm sorry, then you're going to have to give back that $250,000 because this doesn't honor my parents. And so they went to court. Now, your job as the jury in this case is to decide whether or not this $250,000 goes back to the man who established the foundation or stays with the woman who's conducting the research. Take a couple of minutes to think about this, and I'm going to ask you to vote for one or the other. How many of you will vote for the man who's setting up the foundation? Does he get his money back? Okay. How many of you will vote for the woman who's conducting the research? Okay. It's an interesting show. Now remind me, and I'll tell you where that went at the end of this program. These are the kinds of decisions that face all of us every day in one form or another. We're trying to decide what we're going to do, as Blair said today. You know, I was sitting here and I was thinking, you're doing my show. Because this is really what we do every day. We have to decide what we're going to do. God calls us to do something. And the point of making ethical decisions isn't to necessarily do the only one thing that's possible to do, and you've got to come up with that thing, because there are lots of messy things in this world. It's a sloppy place to live, and we're not always going to do what we wish we would have done when we look back and say, gosh, if only I had known. We don't always do things the way we hope we would have done them. A lot of this takes time. A lot of this takes a growing up process, so that when we're young and we're energetic, we approach things one way. When we're in the middle of our lives and we have some experience and we're still looking straight ahead because we know the arrows are coming at us. And when we're older and we have the wisdom and the experience to see those arrows as they're going by, and we know how to duck. It takes some life experience to know things, and so we'll make decisions differently. And the hindsight that we bring to a situation doesn't mean that we didn't know what we were doing before. It just means we're coming from a different place. God made all of us. If He wanted us to have wisdom from the time we were born, He'd have birthed us at age 80. But He didn't. And thank goodness, I'm sure, for all the mothers who wouldn't want to carry a baby that long. And for Sarah, who probably was very happy that at her age she didn't have to have a baby for 80 years before it was born. These are the kinds of things that we face, as I said, and sometimes we get confused, and sometimes we say, well, we should do it this way, or we shouldn't do it that way. Now, if you think back into the times maybe in the, I think, mid-70s, and there were lots of fun little books coming out, I'm okay, you're okay, when I say no, I feel guilty, and all the other books that were telling us how to feel about things. Wonderful reverberation, great time. Those were the books that told us that shoulds should be thrown out. The should was, don't should on me. Remember that? That plate that was on the bottom, you could buy that and stick it on your car, don't should on me. Well, should is an interesting word because what it's packaged in are all of the oughts that we live with. You ought to do it this way, you ought not do it that way. The stuff we grew up with. One of the things I grew up with was, you shouldn't feed the dog at the table. First thing I did when I got a dog, I'm feeding this dog at the table, it's my dog. And I live by myself and I'm going to feed this dog at the table. Well, that was my first dog. This is my new dog, as Claire said, 7 months old. He's not eating at the table. I now know why. I'm older, you see. I see what's coming at me, and this dog's not eating at the table. One should not do this. I grew up with this, but I broke it, and I'm changing it back now. Should is an interesting word in the workplace because we have shoulds that come with our codes, that come with various professions. The doctors have a code of ethics, lawyers have a code of ethics. We all carry around our codes in our back pockets so that we know what we're going to do. It's kind of a prescribed way of knowing things before we actually have to think about it. Because if we have our shoulds with us, well, it's an automatic. I know how to do that. I should do it this way. It makes life much easier for me. And then we get some of these newfangled things like medicine that keeps us alive well beyond where we want to be alive. And we don't know what we should do. We didn't have a should in our pocket for that. Now, as we go along in developing the shoulds we're going to break, like I'm not going to tell anybody, and nobody's going to tell me I can't feed the dog at the table, to I'm not feeding the dog at the table, to maybe I don't want the dog in the room when I'm having dinner. We develop our shoulds differently, and somewhere along there, especially if we're parents, we impose these on our children. And the children then say, well, it's mom's rule, and I don't know if I want to follow it or not. And so we work through and we sift through these shoulds. And sometimes if we're parents, we give our children shoulds without grounding them. You should do it this way, which is what my mother did with the dog rule. You shouldn't feed the dog at the table. But there was no grounding for it. I didn't know why. It was just mom's rule. Well, if I had known why, I might have listened. Should is often a power play that we as adults give to our children. You should do it this way. Or it sounds that way to the children. You see, now I'm wiser. I know you shouldn't feed the dog at the table. And it seems to the kids like what we're doing is saying, I want it this way, and I don't have any way to make you do it my way except to say, you should do it my way. So it seems to come from a place of no power. So what I like to do when I hear a should statement is, first of all, forget this stuff about not shoulding. Somebody is saying to me either that this is their rule by which they live, or they don't have any power to impose something on me, but it's important to them that I do it their way. And if it doesn't conflict with some of the shoulds that I have, that are my important shoulds, and there are important shoulds and not important shoulds, if their should is one that I can sort of work with, it behooves me to do that, to get along. Put my should back in my pocket and get along with them. But be aware that when someone uses a should, that it could be that they need something to be a certain way. And that it might be something hollow, or it might not. You know, when you have company coming to dinner, you should put candles on the table, and they should be brand new tapers, never burned before. For some reason, my dinner parties don't last that long, and I've got a whole bag of stubs. And I'll tell you, I light those candles before anybody gets in the door, so that they think I just buy 6-inch candles. Because even though you shouldn't invite company to dinner and use old candles, because there's something about it doesn't make them feel welcome. Darn it, I just feel like it's such a waste. You know, that's wasting the dollars that I have, wasting the resources that I have, and the money that I might use for something else that God might have me use in another way. I'd be wasting on topping off all these candles. So we can put some of our less important shoulds in our pockets. And we learn this as we grow up. One of the things that we learn as we're growing older is how to tell stories. We tell them pretty good as kids, don't we? Where were you? Well, I don't know what I'm going to say. My sister was never good at this. She always went to me. Where were we? My job was to tell the stories. I want to tell you one now. This one is called Mandarin and the Tailor. It comes from Vietnam, and it goes something like this. There was a young man who was appointed to the position of a mandarin. He was very proud, and he went off to his best friend, and he said, do you know, I've been appointed to the position of a mandarin. Yes, people are going to come to me for counsel. Oh, it's going to be wonderful. I can hardly wait. The ceremony's going to be very soon. And his friend said, well, that's very wonderful, you know. If you're going to be a mandarin, you really should have a new robe. Oh, yes, a new robe. I must have a new robe. A celebration like this calls for a new robe. And his friend said, I know a tailor. I can refer you. So the young mandarin said, oh, thank you, I'll go right now. And indeed he did. And he went off to the tailor. And the tailor did what tailors do. The tailor measured from the back of the neck down to the bottom of his waist. He measured from shoulder to shoulder and from wrist to shoulder. And then he did what good tailors do. He said, now I need one more piece of information. At what point in your career are you a mandarin? Well, the young man thought that that was rather intrusive. After all, this was only a tailor. What did he mean? At what point are you in your career? So the tailor tried to explain, and he said, well, you see, it makes a difference on how I hem your robe. Because if you are a young mandarin, you will be very proud, and you will walk about with your shoulders back and your head up. And you will strut about, and of course I will need to make the back of your robe longer, or the front of your robe longer to accommodate this particular stride. And if you are a mandarin with some experience, you are going to look out at the world straight in the eyes, and you are going to be able to see what is going on. And if you are an old mandarin who is weighed down by the weight of the world, your robe will need to be longer in the back and shorter in the front. So that I can make your robe, please do tell me, at what point are you in your career? Well, the young mandarin gave him the information, but thought less about his robe than he did about why his friend sent him to that particular tailor. You see, we grow with our decisions. We change with our decisions. The point isn't always to make the best decision forever and ever. It's to do the best that we can where we are in our lives at that time. The young mandarin had some things to learn. The first thing he needed to learn was that he had some things to learn. Where was he in his career? It's a tough thing to do. Whether we're doing business ethics or biomedical ethics, the point is still the same. It's to look at things clearly and to try to decide. And this is particularly hard when we have so many shoulds. Now, our shoulds are usually the rules that we live by, sort of the difference between right and wrong. Okay? Most of us can decide between right and wrong, right? Anybody who can't decide between right and wrong? What about between good and bad? What if what's right is not what's good? Then what do we do? That's where we get into trouble. That's the problem we had with the man who wanted to give away the $250,000. We couldn't decide which side was right and which side was good. We had trouble with it. We have trouble with these decisions all the time. And we can do the same thing with biomedical ethics. In fact, let's try one. let's say that we've got a liver. Here it is. See my liver? Not my liver. See the liver? I've got mine. Okay, this liver is hard to come by. You know how very difficult it is to do organ transplants. Or to donate organs. We're always asked when we renew our driver's license, will you donate organs? And we have to decide. So here's a liver. Now, there are several people who need this liver. It's not just a matter of, do I get a liver transplant if I need it? It's, there's one liver, and there are lots of us who need it. Now, I'm going to tell you about the people who need this liver. And you decide which one of them might get the liver, because there's only one liver. Now, the first person who needs the liver, and they're all going to die if they don't get it. They will die if they don't get this liver. The first person is a man who just donated a lot of money to the hospital and they built a new wing. The second person is a mother with 4 children. The third person is a man who's conducting genetic research, and he's a black man. And there aren't very many people who do it, and there aren't very many black people who do it. The fourth person is a man who was convicted of a crime, served his time, and is out and wants to start a new life. The fifth person is a woman who was abused as a child, who has gone through a lot of problems, drank herself into losing control of her liver, and she needs this liver or she will die. Now, think again for a minute, and you don't need to vote out loud this time, but think a minute. Which person, if you are on the committee and you will decide who's going to get this liver, who are you going to say? Because if you don't decide, nobody's going to get it, and 5 people will die. But you can save one. Who will you save? Who will you save? Happens all the time. The problems that we find in looking at television for some of these solutions is that television tells us to look at the situation this way. Does this person get a liver? And then the medical team gets together and they decide, well, yes, I think that they can get through the surgery because afterward they're going to need all of these drugs and there are people to administer the drugs. They won't be living alone and it's going to, we can monitor, and they never look at, there's one liver and there are 5 people. Actually, the ratio is 7 to 1, but I couldn't think that fast. The problem with living in this American society where we are so independent and we think that what we have to do is pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, because if I can do it, anybody can do it, and cowboy spirit says this is the way it is in America, and I'm proud of it. It's up to me. I'm the only one who makes my life. The problem with that kind of thinking is that we get into the whole idea of who deserves the liver. Not who gets the liver, who deserves the liver. And when we talk about things being deserved, what we're talking about is the right, the rule. What rule do we follow? What law, what code? And the rule or the law or the code is the bare minimum of where we go as Christians. That's as far down as we go. Because I'll tell you, most of us would never, ever do a really bad thing. Most of us in here. And most of us avoid doing things that are wrong. Our challenges are between doing something right and something good. And we know we have to do the right thing, and we're going to do the right thing, but our challenge is to jump over and do the good thing. Now, what's the good thing? The good thing is doing what the other person expects of us, meeting the expectation of the other guy, not our own. And you know that's very difficult when we're communicating and we've got all these different shoulds in our pockets. Because the shoulds are the rules, and my rules are different from your rules. So we have to find out where we can get along with each other and then try to meet the expectations of the other person. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a martyr during World War II, is a Lutheran, was a Lutheran. He was killed by the Nazis. He was a pastor. Spent some time in New York studying over here. Knew the American culture very well. Wrote a book called The Cost of Discipleship, and he uses the Greek term perisson all the time to explain the difference between the bare minimum of the law and the good that we try to achieve as Christians. So when we look at the 5 people who could get this liver, as Christians, I'll shortcut this for you. The answer that I would come up with now, that I would not have come up with 5 years ago, would be the mother with the 4 children. Because what I will look for is need. Now, of course, they all need the liver. One of them, the first person, deserves the liver because of all the good that he's done. He built a wing on the hospital. The mother has 4 children. The third person, the person who's doing the genetics research, that's a societal decision. What can this person give back to society? That's a should. We should do that because it's good for all of us. And we want to be part of a group. So there's a little borderline. If we didn't have the mother, might we think of this person? The person who deserves a second chance. Well, you know, I'd kind of like to have a second chance because I goof up all the time. And then finally, the woman who has the liver problem and will die because she's been drinking too much. Now, lots of different ways to go here. But the woman with the 4 children, because we say in Christianity we look for need. Those children need her. And that, the need of those children, is greater than the needs of the society to have a geneticist at this point. Other people can do that job. There's only one person who can be the mother of those children. So from a Christian perspective, we look to go beyond the rule of the right and into the good. And who has the greatest need? The children. It's a tough thing to make ethics decisions. And we're never going to get it right all the time. We're never going to get it good all the time. But what God tells us, what Jesus tells us, because we do have a triune God, is that what's important is not the decision we make. It's not how we make the decision. What's important is that we know that as we're making the decision, that God is with us. I try to tell that to a corporation. Not an easy job I have here, but sometimes I can do it. But really, what's important is that we know that no matter what we do, no matter which one of those people we would have selected, it's okay. God's with us. God wants us to do the best we can do. And that's all God wants us to do, is to know that God is with us when we make these horrible decisions. And they are tough. They are so difficult. And they come at us, believe me, every day. It's not just the big one that comes along when you have to decide, do I pull the plug? Or do I fire this person? What do I do? First thing we do is know that God is with us. And then we do the best we can do. That's all there is. Isn't that tough? Isn't that just tough to know that that's all there is that we do? We, Americans, who do it all by ourselves, who are totally in charge of all that happens to us. We control what we can, but we do all of this with God. So that's what we're about in ethics. Tough stuff. Not tough stuff. Not when we're standing alongside a God who says, you can't make a mistake. You can't make a mistake that's so bad and so big and so horrible that I will ever leave you. You will not be alone. So, the next time that you watch a program on TV like LA Law, Imagine how it could change your life. Some of the programs are a little shallow. Some of them will say, well, it's just as easy as choosing between the plaintiff or the defendant, or do we do the surgery or not? Sometimes not. But that's what I do for a living. Any questions? Oh, look at this. Should we go back to, I have a Cocker Spaniel in the car. Shall I bring him in? He's really cute.
Do you have a problem with whose eyes are looking at it through? In other words, it may look that it should be done this way to me, but the next person don't look at it as I look at it.
That's right. Whose decision is it?
Right.
Right. Correct.
Whoever made it.
Whose decision is it? You see, I can't make a decision for someone else on some of these things. It's not my decision. If I were to make your decision, I would be, and I'm not using this term lightly or silly, I'd be stealing that from you. And we know we're not supposed to steal. That's your decision. It doesn't belong to me. Now, if you come to me and say, I need to talk this out, and you ask for my opinion, you're asking for my opinion. And I can give you that. That belongs to me. But you know what? It's only opinion. That's all it is. If the decision belongs to you, then you make it. And live with it and know the rest of us will be here. And God, more importantly, was there at the same time. Yes?
What would you do with a person on her deathbed or his deathbed who has already contacted Dr. Dvorkian and comes to you for an opinion?
You think you're giving me something I haven't dealt with. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. I'm from Michigan originally. I don't like Dr. Kevorkian. The reason I don't like Dr. Kevorkian is because Dr. Kevorkian is putting the wrong question on the table. The question is not whether or not I have the right to do what I want with my body, which, by the way, I didn't create. The question is, what do I do in the community in which I live, that community being my family primarily? What do we do when we're faced with this terrible decision? And the person who came to me and said, you know, I'm facing death. And I may need for you to do some things, which may include pulling the plug. Had a conversation with me. Now, I was the responsible party. I was the one who was going to sign the papers on this stuff. Can I do this? So I very candidly said, can't do it. I cannot pull that plug at that moment. That's my decision. You need to find, since we're working together, this was my husband, you need to find a way to help me to help you. And we had a little time. It was cancer. So we had a little time. And what we worked out was to communicate with each other to find out that his fear was to be in a hospital, in a strange place, undergoing a lot of pain that would put his parents through a lot of pain. He didn't want his mother and father to see him going through something that was as awful as what we were anticipating. So we worked through hospice. We got what is called palliative care, which means the pain was reduced. And we found a way to work with the drugs so that he was cognizant and sitting up and having conversations up until the day before he died. And those last 24 hours, we just dealt with it together. And we knew when it was coming because sometimes you can tell. Now you can't say, well, the date is going to be February 23rd, and that's when he's going to die. So everybody come over, you know, before the 20th because those last 3 days we went along. You can't do that. But the breathing changes at the last few hours and some other things happen. So we knew the last few hours that it was not a great time to have company over. Those were the questions that my husband had with me. What are we going to do with this? What if I need you to pull the plug? I can't do that. And it wasn't just a religious decision. I can't do that. It's something this person cannot do. Now, if somebody were in a truck and the truck caught on fire and we couldn't get them out, you've seen these horrible television stories that sometimes the camera shows up and they can't get the guy out, so they show the camera of the guy dying in the burning truck. What do? Do you have a gun? Do you shoot the guy so he doesn't burn to death? I hate to say it, but I couldn't do that. And I would be terrible. I know I would be terrible, but I would be listening to Blair's sermon today, going through my head saying, and God wants you to take control and do something. And I would be like a deer in headlights. I could not do that thing. And I have to live with the consequences, but I make that decision knowing full well that even though I think that that's the wrong decision, it's not a bad decision. I am not a bad person. I am simply not at the point where I can do that thing to give that person that kind of comfort. I can't do that. Someone else may be able to do that and give that person what they need. Because am I killing them or are they dying? Just because the death is going to happen that fast instead of as slow as the cancer my husband died from doesn't mean it's any less of a death or any more of a death. Death is coming, and sometimes you can see it as fast as a burning fire or as fast as a bullet, and sometimes it's as slow as cancer. And we don't know what to do. And we don't have those shoulds in our pockets. So we make the best decision we can make, knowing full well that no matter what we do, as I said, it will be okay. And it's hard to recover from some of these things. It's really tough to recover from some of these things. And I'm grateful that I have never been in a situation where I have a gun and somebody's burning up in a truck. I don't know what I do. It's the worst thing. But God's with us. I shouldn't say but God's with us, and God's with us. And Kevorkian, I don't want to. He's putting the wrong question on the table. I used to do PR for a living, and his lawyer is using the worst kinds of public relations gobbledygook to try and change the question. It's the same thing with the abortion question. We have the right to do what we want with our bodies. Wrong question. Wrong positioning. That's not what it's about. It's not about our right to do what we want with our bodies. When we focus on that, of course we're going to say we have these rights. Of course we are. We're Americans. That's what we do. But the big question is, what do we do with this situation whereby women are becoming pregnant? We need to back up a step and say, how do we as a community deal with all of these potential babies? And when we look at it from that point of view, we can come up with different solutions. And the Kevorkian question is the same thing. What is going on here? And we don't often back up enough to say what's going on. We look at rights and laws and rules instead of the good for the people who are involved. Long answer, short question. But you picked the one. Yes?
When you gave us the first question about the jury and the fellow that was donating the money, I guess when I came to it, I sat on a jury last year, and I know that the judge always gives you a confinement in which to make your judgment. And he will say, at least he said to me, you are to only think what's in terms of the law. Your emotion should not enter into this. And so if I'm given that ruling, I'm going to look at it one way. And I'm going to say, okay, this was a commitment, this is the way it has to go. But if I'm not given that ruling, I feel that I can allow my emotions to enter into it, and I might go a different direction. So I guess I'm saying that it would be difficult with us sitting here making that judgment as opposed to sitting in a jury room if the judge has made a ruling in some way that you're supposed to be thinking in a different direction. You're pigeonholed into this thought.
Well, emotions and the good aren't the same. You can have emotions on the right, on the law side, and be intensely positioned with the law, just as you can be intensely positioned with the good. So emotions are part of who we are. And yes, they do tell us in court to deal with the facts, ma'am. Deal only with the facts. But the fact of the matter is that we come to this with a particular mindset. That's why when they select juries, they want a variety of people who come from a lot of different places. And the plaintiff and the defendant's attorneys are looking for people who are of like mind with what they think they're trying to accomplish. So even though we may be going and dealing with only the facts, we still are called upon, at least in this situation as Christians, to approach those from a particular perspective. And I mean, a woman is going to look at a case far different from the way a man looks at a case. A jury case I sat on a couple of years ago was a paternity case where the decision was, is this man the father of this child? And the woman said, yeah. And he said, no, I'm not. This child looked just like this man. This man had a great attorney. This woman had a rotten attorney. This attorney, honestly, this was one of these people. And he just didn't present the case well. And if we had gone with the facts, it would have been a far different case. We were a hung jury. They had to do the whole thing all over again with two, hopefully, different attorneys. So you see, some of us could not go with the facts of the case. And you can hang up a jury. I do that sometimes. That kid was his kid. That was his kid. I'm sorry, the facts weren't all there. They were not all there. We didn't have DNA testing at that point either.
One quick question. Have you ever been sued? Or part of a lawsuit?
I've been part of a lawsuit.
Okay.
Why do you ask?
I'm in the legal profession.
I've been part of a couple of them. Yeah.
Okay.
The first one I was part of was when my employer was being sued by another woman who said that the employer wasn't being fair, that all the good jobs were going to the guys. Well, I hate to tell you this, but I was getting a lot of good jobs. And I'd already left. It was the Detroit News, and it was a lawsuit case saying that all the men reporters, and there are a lot of men reporters at this time. This was the late 60s, early 70s. And there were most of the reporters were guys. And quite frankly, I didn't want to go out and do some of the stuff they had to do. I did not want to cover fires and go out into the seedy parts of town. I was afraid to do that. I was only 20 young years old. And I didn't want to do it. So I was glad I didn't have to do that. And I got really good assignments. So when she brought this lawsuit, well, this is part of not the facts, but this was just one of these women who sat at her desk and filed her nails. I wouldn't give her a really good assignment either. She couldn't write either. That's just my opinion, you see. And opinions sort of count. So when that lawsuit came around, and it was a class action lawsuit, and I was asked to participate, I just said no. I kept thinking, come on, Detroit News, call us and see if there are any among us who might want to be on your side. And no one called. And of course, she won the case. Her husband was an attorney, a good attorney. And the news settled out of court. And then I got this thing in the mail saying, sign here and we'll send you money. Class action lawsuit. So I wrote a letter back and said, ain't signing it, don't want no money. I was treated well. I don't want that money. I don't care if we won or not. We lost. That was the first one. The second one was when I was with a company here in Ohio, and someone filed a class action lawsuit, much the same. The women aren't getting the good jobs. The guys are getting all the good jobs. And darn it, that time, the guys were getting the good jobs. And the women were being left into clerical positions. Now, I was no longer with the company once again because of that. I left the Detroit News to go there. Not my brightest move. And when that one was settled, and they sent papers to me and said, sign here, we will send you money, I signed. Because I felt that that case went the way I thought it should have gone. I can live with myself either side. So, but have I ever sued? Yes. I sued an attorney once. I sued an attorney because he didn't pay his bill. And I had a contract, and it said, if I do this work and I get this done for you, you'll pay me X thousands of dollars. And he sent me a check for $4,000 less. And I said, don't hold water.
And you got it.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
Attorneys don't like to be sued, especially big-time Charlie Bananas attorneys who are suing PR people who know all the reporters in town. Oh yeah, I was going to win that one. And he owed the money, and we had done what we said we were going to do. Sometimes people just don't. My opinion. Any other questions?
Before we ask about LA law, in your second example, you said that you chose the mother,
The mother.
but you would not have done 5 years before. There we asked what you would have chosen 5 years before.
I would have looked to deserve. I would have looked to merit. I probably would have been torn between the person who just built the wing on the hospital and the person who was doing the genetic research, and probably would have gone with the person doing the genetic research. I wouldn't go that way now. I think about things differently now. Maybe I'm a little less more in tune with what I can do in the world, and that I'm not the only person who can do it. There are other people who could do what I do. Nobody can be a mom to those kids. You know, I don't know where I'll be in 5 years. It just happens to be that the Lutheran perspective happens to go where I'm going now, that to go for need. Lutherans will look to putting need above desert or above societal contribution. I hope that's where I stay, but maybe there's even more to know. Just like before I watched LA Law, I didn't really know to look between the right and the good. And that little bell went off and said, oh, there's a difference between right and good. This isn't bad and wrong and good. And there's a whole, and if there's good, bad, right, wrong, what if there's all kinds of other things to know? You see? So I don't know what else there is to know at this point. There may be even more things to know as I get deeper into the gospel. I may find more good stuff in there and find out that there's another way to think of it. I still think I'll probably stay with the mother and the 4 children, but maybe I'll find another way to get another liver. You know, I mean, that's really what I'd like to do. I would like to recruit everybody in this room to consider organ donation the next time you get your driver's license. Think about it. Think about it really hard. It doesn't mean they're going to take your liver if you stub your toe, you know, but think about it. That's maybe where I'm going. But that's where I would have been 5 years ago. I know it. I know it. I am so close to the right. I am so much a rule follower, you know? Except, maybe not, I did feed that dog at the table. I got to think about it, you know? See, I'm a little flexible. I can change.
Sorry, but professionally, okay, you're Christian
Yes.
approach, not too far from the Jewish, but if you're in corporations, you could run in Muslims and other religions. Is that a problem? Is that you can't work for the government because it's separation of church and state and so forth, the whole...
I do work for the government. I have the government as clients. They're not very ethical. They're not, and they know it. They just don't know what to do about it. I have, let's see, how am I going to tell you? Because I can't reveal client names. They don't like that. I have a client who is one of the largest financial type institutions in the country. Called me in, said, we've got this problem. You got to help us with it. I can do this. Remember, I got that history where I can do this. I got to the end and realized I couldn't. The problem is the executives called me in, and they said, we have a problem with our non-management people. Ding, 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 ding. We have non-management people here. We have non-people here. And I said, well, tell me about your organization and how you're set up. Well, you see, we have the executives, then we have the management, and then we have the non-management people. And they don't know that they're entitled to annual reviews because we haven't been doing them. And the law now says we have to do them. So we don't want to get sued, so you have to tell them that they're entitled. So they'll go to their managers, and their managers will then do the annual reviews they're entitled to. I said, well, how are you doing this now? And they said, well, what we're doing now is we're filling out the little form, and we're saying, you did this really, 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 really good, and we want you to change this, 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 and this, and here's your 2%, sign here. And I said, well, what kind of conversation do you have if they disagree? They don't disagree. And standing like this with me, they don't disagree. They don't. Honestly, this is what happened. They don't disagree. And I'm looking at this body language, and I'm hearing about these non-people. And I'm just trying really hard to be nice. I need to go, pay attention! And they weren't doing it. And it was really hard. And I worked with them for about 3 months to try and do enough research in the organization to prove that it was just this one group of people who were like this, that maybe there was something redeeming in between that was going on, and maybe they were going to be able to do this. They cannot do this. This government financial institution at this point can't do this. They can't, because they won't allow themselves to be people. They have the important people and everyday people and the other guys. And until they realize that they're all people, they're not going to be able to share among one another. So I recommended they bring in an organizational development specialist, not to work with these guys over here, but to work with these guys over here, because this is where the change needs to happen. These people here need to work with these people here to get them to offer the annual reviews so that the people here can learn what their career opportunities are, so that they can grow in the organization, so the organization can grow. And I can't do that. That's not my area of expertise. So I took that really big contract. It was over $30,000 and went, I can't do this. There are times when I can't do this. At the same time, I sat down with a couple of the people in the middle and told them point blank why I can't do it. And the first thing I said was, you need to change some names. You can't have some non-management people. That's just sort of unknown in this society. At some point down the road, just like we have sexual harassment things, you're going to have somebody file some case somewhere saying, and they even call us non-management, and they're going to use it against you, even though it's not what you intend. Just like sometimes we run into harassment cases where they're not harassment cases at all. It's just somebody saying, gee, you know, Blair, you did such a good job with that sermon today. Don't sue me. Sorry, Ellen, I just couldn't resist. That's not a harassment case, but there are people who will file cases like that and call it harassment, and we're going to end up with this financial institution having the same kinds of problems just because of the way they use language, because of the way they treat each other. And it's not just manners, it's lack of respect. So they need to make some real big changes internally. And they can see it, you see, but they see it because of the law. The law is making them do something. And that's oftentimes what happens. The law calls us up short because we're not doing the bare minimum. And that's where we start. And then, as Christians, we try to go further. We try to actually care about each other. In one case that I worked on, we had a company that had a sexual harassment case, and the company had just hired this guy. Do you want to hear this, or are you ready to go home? I'm keeping an awful long time. This will be quick. This is a big company that you all know about. They bring good things to life. And they had a case where they hired this guy to do this executive job. And they looked for him for 8 months, and I don't remember what he did, but he did this really important job, and there aren't very many people who do it, and he was way up in the hierarchy when they hired him in, a VP or something. And he was there for 6 months, and 11 women complained about sexual harassment. 11 women complained. So they thought maybe they ought to do something about that. So they brought him in and they said, well, we're going to, talk to you about this. We have to decide what we're going to do because we have a policy. You see, it's the 1990s now. It's not the 1970s where this was all new stuff. This is the 90s and we have laws and we don't want to get in trouble, so we have to do something. So ultimately, after all kinds of conversation, they decided what they were going to do was to put this person in and keep him doing the same job but not having anybody reporting to him, that there would be someone else in between. He needed to agree to go to some kind of psychological counseling so that he could learn that what he was doing was inappropriate behavior. And the 11 women had to agree to this solution, and he had to apologize to them, each one of them, at the same time, 11 of them in a room. I did this to you, and I'm sorry. And it had to be something he really did. It couldn't be, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. He had to go through this process. And they decided that would somehow work toward a solution. As I understand it, they're still working on it. They said to me afterward, because I asked them, what would you have done if this hadn't been some big-time Charlie Bananas executive? What if this had been someone who works in a non-management job? And they said, well, out the door. They have a problem where we bring good things to life. They're working on that now, too. So it gets kind of messy, this stuff, this world. We're still dealing with these cases. But they settled out of court. There is that. Thank you all for being with me. I appreciate you letting me come into your church and take your time and challenging me to think a little bit more about what I'm doing. I hope this has been helpful to you. Oh, LA law. They decided for the doctor, which would be deciding for the good in Christian terms. There's nothing wrong with deciding for the man, because that would have been deciding for the God. And that's okay too. But they decided for the good. Thank you very much.
And now what do we do?
Now, I gotta go check the dog.
Right. Well, thank you, Ann. I know, I think it is raising issues that we do struggle with, and we don't know all the answers. And so hopefully that's just something to give us food for thought. And we know we're not alone with it, too.
That's the biggest part. You see, without that last sentence, we don't have anything. That's why it's so hard for people who don't have a religious grounding to do this. But for us, it's still hard, but we can live with ourselves eventually.
And thank you
Thank you.
for supporting this kind of first time occasion of doing